What happens when you combine the most innovative, eccentric and charismatic leaders, disruptors and founders from tech, with the pedigree and history of one of the most established institutions within the City of London? The Searching for Mana podcast will be produced in partnership with the London Stock Exchange. I'm Lloyd Wahed, the host of Searching for Mana. We're going to be interviewing some of the leaders, influencers and disruptors in the tech space, where I'm going to be trying to dig in and find out what's their mana, their superpower, their magic. Laura, welcome on to Searching for Mana.
Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Co-founder and was the CRO with Alloy. More recently, has moved to president, which we can go into. But you'll do it all far more justice. If you could be so kind, Laura, just to introduce to anybody in the audience who wants further context or to understand what Alloy is all about and really what your role within it
Sure.
is.
Certainly. Alloy is an identity decisioning platform that is used by both banks and fintech companies to manage all risk, identity-related risk. So that means managing things related to onboarding when a user is applying for a financial product like a bank account or credit card. We're doing all that decisioning in the background around that person's identity and risk. So think of know your customer, anti-money laundering checks, fraud checks, risk checks, and even credit checks. We're also doing that on an ongoing basis throughout the life cycle of that customer. So as the bank or fintech company has a relationship over hopefully many years, we are helping that financial institution stay safe, manage their risk while delivering the best possible customer experience. And my role as president is working with some of our largest clients, partners, prospects, accounts, working with the team very closely and the executive team and board very closely to make sure that we're staying on top of our mission and goals as the industry evolves.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Just to give some context as well around scope and scale. We're in 2023, Q1. What type of number of staff is there? How much investment have you raised? How are you distributed in terms of geography, please?
So we're roughly around 300 people today. We've raised multiple rounds over the years, somewhere between $150 and $200 million at this point. We most recently, we raised our Series C in the fall of 2021 and raised a $52 million extension a few months ago. We've been sort of growing really quickly over the last couple of years, fueled in part by COVID, as many fintech companies had that same experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And just to take it off the beginning, then, just to cover the move to president, what was the thinking? What was the ambition? Why did you do that?
Yeah, so I've been the co-founder CRO for, I guess, about 7 years. We started the company in 2015, and I was always the founder, and we were a very small team for years. So I was always the founder who was doing the external kind of market-facing work. So talking to prospects, accounts, clients, working with sort of in the industry at large and our community at large. And that was wonderful. In 8 years later, 7 years later, we'd hit such a scale that we really wanted to bring in a CRO who had some of the kind of scaling experience. So we sort of know, we've continued to hit every 6 months. We'll sort of stop and go, oh gosh, we've hit like a new level where we've never seen this before. And so we really wanted to bring someone in who had seen around some of the corners that we haven't seen around and had some of that experience of scaling into the, hundreds of millions of ARR. And then for myself, I never imagined I'd be in this position. I never imagined I'd be at a company of 300 people when we were, 12 people for the first 3-4 years at Alloy. And I love I love working with our kind of the industry. I love working with our clients. And I got a little bit further removed from that. And so moving into a role of president really allows me to do some of that work, to get to engage with the community at large, engage with regulators, engage with other kind of partners of ours, clients, prospects. So for me, it really was a way of almost going a little bit back to the beginning and getting closer to the actual work itself. While of course still advising the revenue functions at Alloy and working with some of them quite closely.
Such an interesting phase. So firstly, congratulations for the moment that you've got to in this business's journey. And I know always as a founder, that's hard to receive and not be humble and self-deprecating, and there will be a million things on top of mind that need to be improved and fixed and so on and so forth. But that scale and scope is so amazing. So well done.
Thank you.
What I think I quite relatively quickly like to do is now go back and go through really your background and then the founding journey, because so much of what would be interesting beyond then future projections and what you're going to do in this role of president, which we'll get to at the end of the show, is how you've taken the business, as you say, from a concept, and we'll find out where that concept was inspired from, but really a business of 12 people for a long period of time with a lot of hustle in it, to now 300 people and a huge market opportunity. So I want to cover that as a cultural element, and you as a leader who's grown that business, because it's very close to the core of what the Searching for Mana show is all about. So if we could go back,
sure,
as far as you'd care to set the scene of Laura growing up, so that we can get some type of concept of your influences, and this is pre going to university.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I grew up in Berkeley, California, which in and of itself, I think, is a formative experience for anyone who's been to Berkeley. It's a very interesting place. It's where the kind of primary University of California is. College Town also has a very long history as kind of an activist hub, for lack of a better word. And so that in and of itself, I think it has sort of, it forces you to think about the world in maybe a different way than growing up outside of Berkeley and the Bay Area, in good and bad ways. It's a place where you can, especially surrounded by activism, you think about the world at large and how you might change it. It's also a very kind of privileged place in many ways to grow up, and recent housing issues, I think, show how some of it is a little bit closed off from reality. Anyhow, I had what I consider to be a very happy childhood, but not without challenges. My father died when I was 7, and so I grew up as an only child with my mom, and that was, of course, hard in many ways, but also wonderful in the sense I have a very close relationship with my mom even today. And I think there were a couple of things that instilled in me. One was I grew up surrounded by, adult women, basically. Like I was often the only child in a room of 40-something-year-old women, because my mom would bring me to work with her or bring me to, dinner parties with her or book clubs, and I would kind of sit in the background. And so I do think I, from an early age, could speak to adults and thought, sort of understood what at least adult female behavior in the Bay Area was like. And I didn't grow up, playing with siblings or a ton of other kids on the weekends, for example. So I do think that it sort of grew me up faster in certain ways. The second thing is that my mom really instilled sort of a tolerance for, or even an appreciation of, risk taking. She herself was a risk taker, not in the sense of her career necessarily, but she was always willing to take risks and was okay with me taking risks. And I think I saw that that behavior and that acceptance as a child. And it led me ultimately to, of course, doing what I'm doing now, but especially in my 20s, graduating college, I think most people, or a lot of people, feel a certain pressure from their parents to go to medical school, to go to law school, to get a high paying job. Of course, it comes out of a place of love for most parents, of just like, you want your kid to be stable and be able to provide for themselves. And that's a good way to do it. My mom really didn't put any of that pressure on me. And I think it gave me a little bit of freedom to explore, including quitting jobs when I probably shouldn't have quit jobs, traveling, and ultimately led me to moving to East Africa when I didn't have a job and I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I found these two entrepreneurs I thought were fantastic. And I just said, like, let me just move here and figure out if I want to do something entrepreneurial. And I joined them, and that was sort of the beginning of a new chapter for me.
Laura, what's your mum called?
Martha.
So Martha what I want to understand is, how wouldn't she put that pressure on you in that example you gave of when perhaps you're thinking through subjects? Just wouldn't talk about the subject at all? Because I've seen this with other examples, be interested in, how are you, or like, should we go and do this activity, and almost not put any attention on those type of career or educational decisions. Or she would get into conversation but would just leave it open. What was the situation there?
She certainly demonstrated interest in what I was doing academically, for example, in college, asked me about things, but she would encourage me to try new subjects, right, that I hadn't tried, like take an art history course, take this dance class over here. So I think it was less of a build a career via taking these sets of classes that are going to lead you into a law career, which is sort of the track I was on in my own head. So I think a little bit of it was encouraging exploration. And then part of it was not caring, but not emphasizing it. It was never about grades. It was never about, have you gotten the right internship? Did you figure out exactly what you're going to do next? It was much more of an attitude of like, what will happen, and follow the things you're really interested in and make sure you explore those yourself. So I guess the pressure was there to just make sure I found what I cared about and what interested me. But for myself, I had an inner drive. And in college, I just didn't know what I would do. And I tried to explore a little bit, but I was pretty focused on going to law school. And that was not direct pressure from her. It was just sort of I think a lack of an imagination on my part that led me to that conclusion.
What do you think might have been one of the triggers that did lead you to that conclusion? What was the forming of, even if it seems cliche or whatever it might be, why law started to become the thing to attach yourself to?
Well, my family is a family of lawyers. So that was, I think in large part, I looked around and was like, well, this is the job that you do. That was what I'd known as a kid. I grew up in a family of mostly lawyers. And so I didn't think about anything else for a long time. I didn't really appreciate that there were a lot of other jobs. I knew that people were, involved in business. I had no idea what that meant. I thought the jobs were doctors, lawyers, and investment bankers. And then going to college, I think that was sort of reinforced in certain ways, because a lot of the intention on getting internships or taking classes that are prerequisites for certain things were around those tracks. And especially at that time, I went to an all-women's college, Barnard College here in New York. It was the beginning, I think, of, because I graduated in 2008. It was the beginning of startups in certain ways, but New York was behind, and certainly women's college was behind a little bit. And so I think it took them actually a few years to start looking at offering internships in startups as one example. That was just like, it was not even something you could contemplate. I did, however, have a college boyfriend at Columbia, so just across, quite literally across the street, who was interested in startups, and all of his friends were. And so I actually got to see and sort of live a little bit, in their sort of by osmosis, got to see what they were doing, and they were starting to do internships in startups and tech. And so that was part of what started sparking my imagination. Like, do I actually really want to do law?
What from across the street looked, if it did, appealing about that world that they were in?
It just seemed so much more creative. Getting to do a startup, whether it was your own or being a part of something early, was so much more appealing. So I think first, there's less hierarchy, less rules, less etiquette. I think about going in a law school path, and I did internships in that. It's very hierarchical. It's very, you follow it, you know exactly what you're going to do almost every day for kind of the rest of your life, right? And there's a lot of capped upside and a lot of rote work. And I think seeing the complete opposite in many ways of, you could be 22 and be starting something big, and there may be a ton of downside and a ton of risk, but there's sort of unlimited upside. And I mean that, of course, financially, but also just in terms of what your day looks like. You could have a completely different day-to-day experience. And then I think the culture was appealing. It's just it's much more casual and creative and kind of filled with interesting ideas and people.
So Laura, we understand that you've got a good risk appetite at this point, so that makes sense. What about, you mentioned it a couple of times there, the creative element, because that wouldn't be for everybody necessarily. What was it about that you'd either experienced and you wanted more of, or drew you to it as well?
I think I was seeing little bits and pieces of where you would build. And I think creativity for me is not an artistic sensibility. It's around building, like creating something. So it was really exciting to see, as just one example, when I was in college, I studied abroad in West Africa, in Senegal. And there was, it was sort of around the time when cell phones were becoming ubiquitous, just the kind of dumb phones, right? The flip phones, feature phones. And I think that was the first time I looked around and thought, like, there's an opportunity here to build on top of that. You could do something really interesting by having connected all of these people. Suddenly they all have digital access almost overnight, right? Over the course of a year or two. And I didn't do anything about that. That was just a study abroad experience. But when a few years later, when I was thinking, like, I'm not sure law school is for me and I got to figure out what I'm going to do, I think I went back to that idea that there was something to build there. And so for me, creativity is really just around being able to create something and build it yourself. So you can go from, day one to day two and have actually material impact and having built something. That could be something like signing a customer, that could be building product, but that 24 hours is very different from 24 hours in a law firm. Not that can't be exciting in certain ways, but it's my 24 hours in a law firm were generally spent, copying pages.
And Laura, that can come from, again, like many different ways of coming at thinking through a problem where there perhaps is a solution. It can come from a mind that's curious about design engineering. It can come from sheer ambition to have an impact and create. And of course, the answer is going to be different weightings to all of this. But it can also come from inspired, inspired kind of examples of someone else having done this. So lots of media since that change in New York around 2008 focuses on entrepreneurs like you, and then people coming through want to do that as well because it looks so fun and you get to have impact. And there's a bunch of reasons why people again would want to do it. So in our core search business, we define these as people's drivers, and there's no right or wrong, but you can go through the different elements of drivers, which might be seniority, it could be prestige. So back in the day, prestige would have been in one era to go to a Goldman Sachs, in one era to go to a hedge fund, and then in a more recent era to go to big tech, and then, you know, moving through, probably now it'll be to go to an AI company, so on and so forth. There's an element of prestige about that. A lot of people care about it. Some people don't care about it. Some people are contrarian and want to avoid it. I'd love to know what your drivers in that phase were on reflection. So we've got prestige, we've got seniority. I want to lead, I want to direct, I want to manage. I do not want to, for instance. And then there definitely is an entrepreneur out there. I'd love to know if you feel you were one where it's like, I have to set something up and I need to own at some point. And then with all of that, the final one is, how big does that impact need to be? You have the Elon Musk of the world, you need the impact to go even outside of the earth. And then you have some people who just don't care. So you can talk through those for us, please.
Sure. I think in some ways I wanted to want the prestige driver, but I was always too motivated by what I was doing in the moment. I think in order to be prestige oriented and motivated, you in some ways have to be a lot more of a planner than I am. And so I think I really have always valued, and it took me years to figure this out, because I think in some ways I was disappointed with myself over the years of going like, why can't I just suck it up and go to business school, you know, and get into the best business school or work at the top firm or whatever. But I think I've always just really valued like enjoying my day. And that has been at odds with prestige, I think, fundamentally. I think it's the prestige that it's any inkling of prestige over the years has been coincidental for me, because I've always just prioritized myself, prioritized my enjoyment of my day or week or month, than putting in the reps over 2 years to get to something. I think the other big driver for me has just been impact, and sometimes that can be impact of my own. What can I do today that has this big impact on the business, right? And startup land, like I said, a day can do a lot. So you can actually accomplish a lot. And I think that felt really good to go, wow, we built, you know, we had these meetings today and they resulted in XYZ, you know, someone signing or revenue, or we now have a new plan to go after this new type of customer. That to me was the most attractive thing. So it's not prestige, it's just, and it's not, seniority, of course, matters because you have to be able to have the authority to make those decisions, but that's a lot easier when you're in a 3-person startup. You can have that impact and have that authority. And then lastly, I think when I got into this, you know, 10 or 15 years ago, I could see the impact that whatever technology I was involved with, so at that time it was a very early stage startup in East Africa, would have on the world. And by the world, of course, then I mean the market that I was in, but the possibility of that technology being distributed on a much larger scale was incredible to see. So in that case, it was the difference between someone who had to, if the application was in microfinance, someone who had to do everything with paper cash. So travel to go repay your microfinance loan. That meant leaving your stall in the market for 6 hours, taking a matatu, very unsafe, with a bunch of cash to make your payment, come back. So that was every 2 weeks, you're sort of cutting out almost a full day of your work. To overnight with this technology, being able to digitally pay, that's a huge transformation. And so I think that was the other part for me that was incredibly compelling, was not just my own impact on the business, but the impact that the business could have on people. And that still rings true at Alloy in a different way.
Yeah, that's bringing together a lot of the right type of thinking. You know, to be so many people living in the past or the future is obviously not the healthiest place to be. I mean, you need to be cognizant of making progress towards a goal. But it sounded like you got that just about right. And of course, like, none of it's worth it if there's not a mission you care about. So many people who came into FinTech around 2009 certainly share that was an amazing feeling that this could do good. You know, we can bank the unbanked. Like, banks have just gone and caused this massive issue. I certainly think that we've got that again in this era with blockchain as well, which is really exciting. Not that there's not a lot to do with technology across the whole board. So before we step into how you came to found Alloy, because then there's another piece of advice I want you to reflect on. Just anything to speak to anybody who, you know, the audience might be in that formative part of their career. And again, no right or wrong. Let's not create too much pressure for anybody like your mum wouldn't. But I suppose the way to get you to talk to it is, would you change anything? Would there be any advice you'd give to, you know, pre-Laura setting up Alloy? And then we're gonna go there as well. Is there anything you would change about what you did there that could be useful advice?
It's hard to say I would change anything because all the things led me to where I am today, for which I'm very grateful. But I think it's really easy to look. It's very easy to tell a story about how everything I did was deliberate, and I can kind of pull that thread, right? I studied abroad. I saw microfinance. I tried to go to law school and didn't want to do it, and then ended up working at a startup where we were building on this technology that would contribute to making microfinance a lot more efficient and bank more people. And then, you know, started Alloy. But I think the reality is like, I was always driven by just, what do I want to do today, this week, this month? And so I really hesitate to give any sort of advice that makes it seem like you can just build a career kind of linearly. I think for me, a lot of what made me happy and successful was just listening to myself and trying new things. I think I'm a person who naturally says yes to a lot of things, which has plenty of downsides, but I would say there is an upside in that you try a lot of stuff. And so you get to experiment a lot and figure out what you like and what you don't like. And you make mistakes along the way, and you quit jobs when you maybe shouldn't. And you travel to places, far off lands that will make you nervous, but it has had a really positive impact for me. So there's not much I would change other than leaning even more into that when I had the chance. I think there are more risks I could have even taken than the ones I did. But I'm, obviously grateful for basically every step of the way that led me to where I am.
Again, that's such a hard question to ever try to change anything when you're in a situation you're grateful for. But there's these two type of profiles, of which I think you're one of, broadly speaking, which is getting a breadth of experience early on and experimenting. I think the thing that maybe is not obvious is how much then you must strike when opportunity comes. And so having that type of killer instinct for going for things, saying yes, experiencing, water off a duck's back, but then something comes and it's building on top of each other, is going to work very well, and it clearly worked. Really great to build up your set of experience. And then there is a different profile, which I used to kind of classify as tall and thin, which is incredibly.
No one has ever described me as tall and thin.
I had to think about the language of this. The other was short and fat, just by the way.
Yes.
I need to recoin these things. But broad and experimenting, and then very, very focused. And you could think of a programmer potentially in a given sector, and almost saying no to absolutely everything else. And the way very early on to accumulate into disparately more experience than most people is those two types of path. The middle is absolutely not. And that's what graduate programs and traditional professions do, is very slowly take you through a stepping stone of what over a several plus period of time makes you an expert. And then there are a multitude of opportunities. But if you want to get there relatively quickly, as you did, then that's a really great example of let's think of how to call it. I'm gonna think of what the new phrasing of this is, but that type of profile, and to get to where you did. So Laura, if you could now take us through really the genesis story of Alloy, from where you were there to how you got to founding Alloy, please.
Sure. So I guess, and one of the things I did well, but maybe I should have done faster, sooner, was I quit a job because of a horrible boss. And I actually think that is, it's a little antithetical to, I think, how most people approach things. I think there's a lot of like, just stick with it. You'll kind of rise above it and get better and be stronger because of it. And I actually think in some ways that's really bad advice, because not only are you miserable, but you're probably not learning from anyone great then. And I think in order to do well professionally, you need to learn from amazing people around you. That's one of the best places about great workplaces is who you're working with and who you're working for. And so in 20,
Sorry, that's
yeah.
very interesting. Sorry to kind of, can you explain what made them a bad boss?
Oh, this one was so toxic. I think it was in this case, for me, it was a little bit of a bad fit, because that person really cared about their advancement within the firm, and they were going to do anything kind of at all costs to advance. And so that meant that manager was not bringing anyone along with them, right? There was no sort of collaboration, very little, let's all learn this together and I'm going to give something to you in exchange for the work you're doing for me. And it was very political. That's another, it's a trait I find very toxic in work environments and in people. And in this case, it was for their own sake. And I understand why they were doing it, but it was behavior that made everyone around them not trust them. And there was sort of a lack of collaboration as a result. And so for me, that was a good lesson in how not to act in a workplace and how to not get people to trust you.
And their seniors couldn't see this?
The who can see it?
The seniors to that boss couldn't see this.
Couldn't they? That's right. That's right. Because when you're someone who's that political, or who's just motivated in that moment to get what you need to either survive or to thrive at that firm, to get the job you really want, I think you can be very skilled at sort of managing up and covering everything underneath. And in my case, I was very junior. There was very little I could do. And I actually think the right decision was quitting. So I quit without a new job and just said, I'm going to figure this out. I was very fortunate to have a mom who would house me and feed me in a time where I didn't have an income again. And I moved home and said, like, what am I going to do next? And I just went back to what do I love doing? So at that point, I had been investing in funds primarily, and occasionally in companies. I would find myself just jealous, basically, of entrepreneurs I would meet with at that point who were starting things. And so I decided, like, I need to go back to something really early stage. What I love is building. I love having this impact. I love doing this kind of fun, scrappy work day to day. I don't love spreadsheets that are so far removed from the actual work. And I I took some time to just look around and see what there was. And I eventually found Tommy, my co-founder. So Tommy was giving he was doing a pitch, and I think it was covered in TechCrunch or something, on behalf of a very early stage startup. And I was looking for something in payments. I was really interested in payments still, and payments infrastructure in particular, from my time in East Africa. And I found him and I reached out and said, hey, I think what you're doing is really interesting. Can I join you? And I think he was shocked, because they were this tiny, maybe 4 people in Richmond, Virginia. I don't think anyone was reaching out to join them at that point. And I joined them to do business development. It was a really interesting problem set, which was that kind of similar to Alloy, risk is one of the biggest problems in building financial products. And in that company, we were tackling ACH risk. So how do you make this very clunky, very antiquated system in the United States? These payments take 2 to 3 days to settle. How do we make it instant, but not open ourselves up to tons of risk? And so we started experimenting with other fintech companies. This is 2014. So it's kind of the early wave of crypto wallets who also wanted really good, fast customer experiences with ACH. And so we were building there, and we came to the conclusion that ACH was a huge problem, still is a huge problem. But the kind of critical part of it was actually around identity. And so we were looking at it and going, we could where's the API for identity? Where's the Stripe for identity? This was 2014, 2015. It didn't exist, was the kind of short answer. And so we, in 2015, decided to leave and go start Alloy. And our mission kind of has remained the same ever since.
How did you get to the point where your conviction was strong enough to do that from almost a research validation perspective? But I'd like to know how deep you went there.
There were a number of factors. It was not just deep conviction in this. We also had realized that the company where we were was not gonna probably grow in the ways that we needed it to grow for a lot of reasons. But a lot of it just came from talking directly to customers who were going, great, you've helped me with my ACH. Now help me understand how I can do better KYC, better AML. And we had probably 10 of those conversations with early stage, companies. At that point, we really were focused on FinTech only. We didn't know anything about banks. We weren't talking to banks. But that conviction came as we started thinking about this and talking to more folks. We ended up doing an accelerator program here in New York as Techstars. And we were fortunate to get to meet dozens of companies very quickly through that program and validated it in a month, maybe pretty short time, by just talking to tons of them. And the great part was, this was 2015. The world was small. The FinTech world was small at that point. At least it felt quite small. And so we got to validate it with a number of different use cases and people through that network. And just, dozens, maybe hundreds of conversations. We built wireframes that showed, and a demo that showed, this is what it's going to do. This is what it's going to look like. Is this something you'd want? And so we pretty quickly got to, yes, there's something really interesting here.
And from that moment, when's the first time that you pinch yourself and think, oh my God, we've got something pretty big here?
It was pretty quickly. So we started in kind of summer of 2015. That's when we did the Techstars program. We raised a round of funding, I think in October of 2015. And that felt like we were on top of the world. We were like, we have figured this out. This is going to be incredible. We had a FinTech company within a bank that was committed to using us. We were stoked. We just thought we were going to be the next big thing. That didn't last very long. It was like a couple months until we realized this is so much harder than we thought. That customer evaporated. We had all sorts of issues with actually shipping the product, many of which were just, we didn't realize how much you had to build in terms of compliance, data security, just kind of table stakes to launch a FinTech product. Now I think everyone knows it. And now there's many more tools and services to actually make it a lot faster and cheaper. But in 2015, they didn't exist. And so we were doing everything from scratch. And so pretty quickly reality hit and we realized we didn't raise enough money. It's going to take us, 6 months longer to actually launch this product than we thought. Where are the customers? But there was a brief moment in, October, November of 2015 where we thought we were on top of the world.
And again, like the question with your own early phase of working out what you might enjoy in your career, in that early phase where what it sounds like was sure is that you'd found this brilliant kind of co-founding team, you'd raised some money, and you're trying to work out, where do I spend my time?
Yeah.
And I'm just assuming that you potentially were looking at where the partnerships were going to be, but also the individual who's going to raise the money. So we can go into those because it's interesting. But you've also gone into like an incubator and an accelerator.
Mm-hmm.
And so what else makes me think of is early on, and you haven't built something like this before. Were you out there using that serendipity to get mentors in, starting to talk to advisors, like, well, what was your scope? Not just a
Yeah.
day, but what was the week made of to make that opportunity successful?
I think the sort of nice part about being a jack of all trades, like a person who can talk to people, maybe that's the way to put it, in a company that does not have a product, right? We didn't have anything to actually sell. The nice part about that was the only thing I could spend my days doing was talking to people. So the rest of the team, we were a team of 4 or 5 at that point. The rest of the team could build product. They could sit there all day and all night and actually build something. I couldn't. So I had to figure out ways to be useful. And at that early stage, you're not launching SEO campaigns. You're not doing much other than just getting out there. And so a lot of my days and weeks were just spent talking to as many people as possible, initially to validate the idea, right? To have 10 conversations with heads of product or risk or compliance or whoever would listen to me basically at these fintech companies and saying, would you buy, is this something that is interesting to you and what feedback do you have for us? And then eventually going to those same people and going, look, we're about to launch, which of course we thought we were, but it was a little longer, saying, what would you pay for this kind of thing? What do you need to see to actually sign with us? And so that period, and in the beginning, I even kept sort of a fake CRM of sorts, right? Before we had a product, I still tracked everything. That was really valuable for then going to investors and going, look, like, sure, we don't have a product and we have $0 of revenue, but look at all these people who would actually use this. And you can go talk to them yourselves if you want. That ended up being very powerful and certainly not a waste of time. There were also kind of early, now I look back on it and I realize they were early marketing activities, but at the time I just thought I was sort of getting our name out there a little bit and trying to build a network for us as Alloy. So there were some early things we did, like getting together kind of who we thought were thought leaders in the space and hosting small events, for example. And I think those are other activities that turned out to be quite valuable, even though at the time I just felt like we were just trying to get those people to have dinner with us, basically. And it worked out quite well. But none of it was necessarily out of a sense of this is how I should spend my day. I think the other thing I did, I've always kind of liked the challenge of outbound. So I've always I really like seeing if I can get someone to respond to me, basically. And so I spent a lot of my time not just building the network through who we could already meet, but going out back cold LinkedIn messaging people and saying, hey, can you talk to me about this problem that you're facing? And that was a good chunk of my days and weeks too. And turned out to be, we've landed some of our biggest customers that way.
Just before we move on, because there'll be a lot of people who, I'm not sure if they love it. Maybe that's the key, Laura, but
yeah,
doing outbound, you've got to turn it into like a little addictive game, don't you? But
that's exactly right.
If you could give a toolkit or anything you'd like to talk to about how you kind of think about it and some advice for the audience.
Yeah. I do think you have to turn it into a little bit of a game. You have to enjoy the challenge of it and go, okay, what is my response rate going to be, basically?
Yeah.
You have to not care about not getting responses. You just have to ignore it, develop a thick skin, whatever. It's really not going to hurt you in any sort of way. And I think a lot of what people don't appreciate is that people like helping other people. People especially like helping founders. It's kind of exciting. I think people get to live vicariously through other founders a little bit, right? Even spending an hour of your day, you feel like you're doing a good deed if you talk to a founder and help them out in some way. And so you actually, as a founder, you can have a very high response rate if you approach people the right way. And so I really enjoyed sort of thinking through what would motivate someone to respond to me? Why would they ever take 30 minutes with me? And I'd done that earlier in my career when I was job seeking at various points. In fact, I've found jobs by just reaching out to people. I think every time I've gotten a job has been, I'm just going to reach out and see if this person will respond. And then it's either been a job that person was hiring for, or they've introduced me to someone. It is surprising how much people actually just want to help you if you ask them the right way.
Wow, this resonates with me a lot. I had a father who came over from Beirut to London when he was relatively young, fleeing the war, and had to kind of become or he decided to become entrepreneurial. And certainly, like, some of the experiences I got from him would just be, they're just zero awareness or any kind of risk barometer. We'd walk into a hotel, nothing but he'd just walk into the manager's room, come out, be best friend with him. We'd have a reserved table in the restaurant. We'd then go in the restaurant. He'd be in the kitchen telling them how he likes his meal. And so, without any thought that I would be good at what you could say. I mean, I started as a trader. Let's say there's quite a lot of sales involved in it. I don't know if I'm going to be good or bad at this. For whatever reason, I was really good at it. And I think it was just the ability to not do what I think I see like 95% of people do, which is the kind of trodden path, and just think, like, how do I get to this relatively quickly? Like, where do I go? Who do I speak to? And then that thing that you said is such a good piece of advice, which is, how can we get onto the same team? Like, how can I implore the person to support me? And so, I'm going to just speak to someone in that business and ask them, what do you recommend? Like, who should I go and speak to? And so often people will do that for you. Now, the question I have for you is, you've got that skill set and you had that founder title, and you're completely right. And I had this same challenge too, which is like, okay, I can seem to do this. Because of the profile, I'm not sure there's much skill set necessarily that I've got going on here. Now, how do I scale this into the sales team? And you've been through this. So if you could talk to that as well, please.
Yeah. I think you won't have the same hit rate, right? Like, it's different when I do an outreach as to someone else on our team, but the concept is the same, which is that the person on the other end is not a company. The person is a person who has their own motivations and feelings, and people are not logical. So you might think, like, why would they ever respond? This has no advantage to them. But people want to help, like we talked about. People also want to be experts. People love being experts. And you can use that to your advantage. You can get people to talk to you, to share something about something they know about. They get to feel smart. They get to feel like they're educating someone else. They get to talk. People just love to talk. And so I think, when I've seen sales reps or BDRs be really successful, a lot of it is just figuring out what might motivate that person on the other end, besides the very logical, obvious thing of, like, can Alloy help them do their job better? Of course, that's, reason number one for them to talk. But reason number 2, 3, 4, 5 might be that they want to share something. They might learn something from you. They might be looking for their next job, and they see this as an opportunity to sort of learn about the industry or meet someone new. And so I think there is this, we're constantly at Alloy thinking through, like, what is the person's motivation? They want to look good to their boss. Like, that's another reason we can help you at Alloy look good to your boss, because you're going to reduce your fraud rates, and that's your job. We can shave off a whole bunch of developer hours, and that's going to make you look great, and that's going to save your budget. So I think there's just these sort of looking at people as real humans and not as their job titles, that makes a huge difference in terms of your kind of hit rate or response rate.
Ridiculously amazing advice there. I love it. So we go back to slightly past that moment, and let's say you've raised the next round or two. You choose when the moment is. I'd love to know around this point how you started thinking. Let's say that there is the product now, it's out there, you've got partners, you feel like, okay, this is big. VCs have come in now. Forget now the user case. We've spoken about that a little bit. The company. And you've had an experience leading into this where you had a boss you really didn't like, and that organization wasn't cognizant of that. And I know you will have been thinking, how do I make sure that this company both is a success, practically speaking, but also is one that I can be really proud of as an environment? What did you do to And just for the audience, you know, like Alloy is certainly award-winning in terms of an environment to work in. It's something that I know when we spoke, you're incredibly proud of. We can talk about that now in your role as president in a bit. But at that point, what did you do for any founders who are listening, or any leaders in kind of like, I'm assuming post-seed Series A businesses, to establish a brilliant culture?
Yeah. I think this goes back to a little bit to how I am as a person, which is that I just do things I want to do. And I think a lot of that, for better and worse at Alloy, is that the founders just wanted to work at a place that was, they wanted to work at. We have to go to work here every day. So we want it to be collaborative, inclusive, fun, casual. Those are all just things we personally, as three founders, valued. And I remember my co-founder, Charles, our CTO, saying that pretty early on to someone that like, well, I have to come to work here every day. So of course I want it to be, you know, these things. And it's simple, but it's true. It's not, especially in the beginning, was not super thought out as like, let's have this type of culture. It's like, let's just have a place that we want to work. That has had good and bad outcomes, because some of the bad traits of founders can kind of, you know, seep into a culture sometimes too. And so you have to figure out ways early to put in guardrails or people or process in place that make sure that you're consistent and that you're intentional about building a culture. One of the best things we did was, we were only probably 14 people when we hired a head of people, who's now our VP of people. She, by investing so early, she was really able to build the right recruiting, you know, hiring, retention, kind of culture, events, all the things that really, I think, make this a special place to work, from the beginning. And so it's one of the most counterintuitive things to me. I was like, why are we hiring someone at 14 people to manage 14 people? Basically, this seems insane. But when you're entering a period of growth, that is the first thing to go. That, like, people, you take all the guardrails off of culture, because you're so focused on revenue, on shipping, product, that you're just not going to, that's never, people and culture are never going to be top of mind. And so you give someone that job early when you're anticipating big growth. And if you've raised a big round of funding, that's probably what's next, is adding a bunch of people. So I think that was one of the things we did really well. We also benefit from being intentional about diversity early. We're certainly not where we want to be. We have progress we need to make, but we're much better compared to our peers. And that's because we were intentional about it. And so there were periods where it was like, yeah, you can just hire the next white guy engineer who walks through the door, who we happen to know because we have a bunch of white guy engineers already. Or we can hold out a little bit longer and see if we can find someone who's better and who's not a white guy engineer, and open the pool up, and then just be a lot more intentional about it. Intentional in who you're going to interview, and then intentional who you're bringing to the office, and intentional about the environment in which they're interviewing. And the moment that we changed that, which was probably when we were around 8 or 10 people, made a huge difference, because then other people have their networks. So we had some women who had networks of other women. We had people of color who had networks of other people of color. And then those people of color come in and interview, and they see other people of color around the office, they're going to be more likely to accept an offer from us. So I just think that there's this, everyone says it and it's cliche, but it's so true, that you have to do it early, and you have to be intentional. It cannot be an afterthought.
Yeah, I love it. There's a brilliant part in Ben Horowitz's most recent book, which we can share in the link, that talks to that intentionality of actually full stop building a culture, but particularly if you are going to try and make it diverse and inclusive in a positive way, some of the proactive steps that you can take, as you've just said, or you don't stand a chance. So again, kudos to you guys. It's amazing. I love how many times you, Laura, can make things sound so like simple, and that it just came naturally. And I suspect that's absolutely true. And that's often the best way to drive, you know, the culture organically to the one that's true to your organization, because so much comes down from the founders.
Yeah.
And you mentioned there, I'm I'm just going to dig into before we move on. But sometimes from that, you get pros and cons.
Yeah.
What were some of the cons out of interest?
Yeah. It's funny. I still learn new ones like every month. Something will come up and I'm like, oh yeah, that's because of the way that we are. And we just didn't address it until now. And recently one was that there's not a good, and this is less cultural and more, it's a little bit more tactical, but it certainly is cultural element, which is we didn't have a great feedback loop between product and sales. That meant sort of like there was a little bit of a product marketing gap. There was just not this language of like sales reps coming back and telling product the insights that they're learning by being on the front lines and talking to customers. And similarly, product wasn't sort of giving any context for what they were building and why, and here's kind of the impact it can have for you as a sales rep going to go out in the market and try to sell this. And so I think what I realized was that Tommy and I almost trusted each other too much in the beginning, because Tommy was product and I was sales. And so for years, we just kind of did what we were doing and we would talk to each other, but there was never any real need to build any sort of formality between the two. We were both kind of involved enough in what the other person was doing to kind of get what we needed out of it. But there was not a lot of deliberate overlap, deliberate discussion, deliberate learning time between the two of us. And so I think a lot about that now, because I think as we grew those teams, and those teams grew very, very quickly over 2 years, we didn't put any of that in place. And so recently we stepped back and I was like, I think that's why. So I just think there are things where I don't know what I could have done differently other than recognize that was going to happen during the scaling period. I think there's a lot of things to be, what is going to break? You have to just, if I could go back and change things, it's like just going through what is going to break when we add 100 people to the team or 200 people to the team in a matter of I think we hired 150 people last year. Like what are the things that are just going to kind of fall apart? That would have been one of them.
You got to love building the system, don't you? Let's find out about your mana in the mana round, Laura.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So quick fire questions. Please speak to any as much as you'd like to, or as kind of crassly as you please. So you get to have the front page of your preferred publication. I don't know what that is for you, but think of something like, Forbes, Bloomberg, whatever it might be. It's probably neither of those, is it?
No.
Okay.
It's Vogue. I want to be tall and skinny.
On the front cover of Financial Vogue, Tech Vogue, what message would you put on that front cover?
I want us to be people who grew quickly, but intentionally for our customers, that we always listen to the customers, no matter how big we got. I think that's one of the biggest challenges of this, is like staying close to customers. I always want us to know, I want the headline to be that we understand our customers so well, even when we're making billions of dollars and have, hundreds of thousands of customers.
Love it. What keeps you up at night?
People. People problems. That is the primary job and stressor as we grow.
Do you have a particular book or, a passage, a quote, an affirmation that you come back to that you could share with the audience, please?
I think recently, I have to actually dig up the quote, but there's a Native American activist, I forget her name right now, who speaks about being kind of a buffalo in the storm. And I think we're in a stormy time in FinTech right now. And so a lot of what is interesting to me is how you can take the approach of a buffalo charging the storm So how do you run into something that's really scary and challenging and not run away from it? And what does that mean in terms of your mindset, but also just the things you spend your day on, how you stay motivated when things are tough? I think that's been a theme for me in the last 6 or 8 months, both as we've grown a lot and we have all sorts of, challenges related to growth, but as the industry has gotten really tough in the last 6 months, it's like, what do you do now? So my mantra now is being a buffalo in the storm.
For your morning routine to get yourself set up, and we've had all different types of responses to this. What do? Is there a go-to routine that you have?
I have coffee as my very first thing. I just can't really live without that in the first 5 minutes of waking up. And then it's getting my 2-year-old out of bed and dressed. And then we're playing with trucks and we're putting stickers all over his body. And we're, running around with rainbow wands. And so that's my morning routine. I would love to say that I get up and go to the gym and then I meditate and then I do all sorts of stuff. But my morning is mostly focused around coffee and a 2-year-old.
From 2 to my daughter's 4, what starts to change there is they can come at you. So I don't get to get the coffee. Lily's jumping into the bed. So that's the bit that routine's about.
I'm not looking forward to that. I like him confined to his crib.
Be the buffalo in the storm.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Okay, amazing. There's a lot of debate, just anywhere, but in our space around, will artificial intelligence displace the workforce? What's your stance on it?
I think it will. I have a different, I think seeing the kind of chat GPT stuff in the last month even has changed my mind. It's pretty incredible. I think it's good and bad, but it's definitely going to change the workforce.
2 more questions. If you could recommend anybody who'd be amazing to come on the Searching for Mana show, who would it be and why?
In your neck of the woods, Nikki Galimas, who I think is an incredible entrepreneur. I think she's tapped into today's problems in a way that a lot of people aren't. And she's incredibly scrappy and thoughtful, and she's also a lot of fun.
Amazing. Thank you very much. And the big question, to preset it, you're on the Searching for Mana show. Mana is your magic. It's your superpower. It's that je ne sais quoi. It's the thing that has allowed you to be so humbly successful. Laura, what would you say your mana is?
It's doing a lot with a little. I think I'm just a naturally very scrappy person, very frugal. I basically buy all my things on eBay. I am great at cooking meals from leftovers. My husband will tell you, I can find anything in our pantry or our leftovers and make a totally new meal. And then I can start a business with not a lot of resources, and just figure out the ways around to do things faster, cheaper, easier. I have, and maybe part of it is just being lazy, but that's how I do things.
So you're like an alchemist.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yep. Oh, well, that all makes so much sense. That's a great one. We're getting mana cards out, and yours is going to be strong. 5 out of 5 for scrappiness. Laura the alchemist.
Good.
What's the best? My partner as well prides herself on what she calls fridge cleaning. So
yeah.
What's the best fridge cleaning meal you've recently put together?
If you have a jar of curry paste, you can make basically anything into a nice curry. And I always have coconut milk in our pantry. And so whatever leftover vegetables or chicken or whatever we have, with a little curry paste and coconut milk goes a long way.
Love it. You've spent a lot of your incredibly valuable time on the show. We're slightly overrunning, but I do want to just to finish, kind of come back to looking forward. So you're now in role of president, and I'd love to know what things you are thinking through and excited about with Alloy. So up to you how you want to do this, because I know we don't have too long. But if you did want to set out, for instance, the Hollywood version of where you think Alloy could go, then the platform's yours.
One of the things I'm kind of perversely excited about Alloy's big future is the problems that we're facing in building digital financial services are not going away. Risk is there. It is always going to be there. And identity is just an unsolved problem. But maybe more importantly, fraud is just getting worse. And so I've already seen the impact that Alloy can have. But I think as these problems get worse, Alloy can make an even bigger dent and just solve these problems to a point where I think we can take some of these entirely off of people's plates. And one of the things I love the most is seeing the companies that we power when they're really early and they adopt Alloy, and that's great. They may be a really small customer, but then seeing them 1, 2, 3 years later grow and grow and grow. We've seen that with companies like Brex, for example. And just seeing that the ability for them to grow while we took this huge kind of gnarly thing off their plate, this whole set of jobs to be done that other than people like us generally don't find fun or exciting. It's like compliance, it's fraud. These are not fun, sexy problems. They're just really hard problems. I love seeing that. And I think we can do that with some of the biggest companies in the world that have the biggest impact on people's financial lives in the future. So I'm super excited to see kind of how the next 2-3 years shakes out, particularly as the fintech market rebounds, which I'm hoping it does.
Well, it absolutely, of course, will. And, this is where category leaders will take even more lead, and great companies are being born. And I'm sure, as you said, looking back in hindsight on how you can join the dots for your own career, it'll be much the same for FinTech and Alloy. And this period has had challenges, but it also has accelerated move to digital, also has accelerated an awful lot of fraud as well. And passionate about the space myself, which wouldn't be obvious that I would be either. But it stifles innovation.
It does.
And so I love what you guys are doing, and I wish you all the continued success, and thank you so much for coming on the show, Laura.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining us on this edition of the Searching for Mana podcast. We hope you've enjoyed it and hope to see you again next time. Please subscribe to our YouTube, Spotify, or iTunes to make sure you receive all the latest episodes as they are released.